Kia ora and welcome to the Happy Revolution podcast. I'm Mika and I'm here with my co-host Rachel. We're both students at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. In this podcast, we chat with academics, activists, pastors and public figures about their areas of expertise and what brings them home. Today, we're talking to Reverend Māmari Stephens, a reader in law.
Māmari is a priest in the Anglican Church and a lecturer in law at VIC. She's here to chat with us about the three tikanga church, feminism and the law, the welfare system, and where she draws her hope from in her life and work. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy our conversation.
Well, jump in then.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for taking some time out of your day.
Yes, we're very excited to have you. We are.
For our first question, I was wondering if you could just give us some of your background and upbringing, to like how you got where you are today.
Ka rui te mihi ki a korua, ngā kia ora tātou. Ngā koua tēnei, he uri tēnei no te rarawa, ki te taha o tōku pāpā, ko te rarawa te iwi ki te taipukera, a rā ko ahi paratera, ko moenui te marae. Engari whānau mai ahau ki o tātahi. Koe nā te wahi I tupuake ai ahau. So just saying there that my iwi's te rarawa, that's in the far north, a place called Ahipara, but I was born and raised in the south. So yeah, now I'm living midway between both. So yeah, my name is Māmari. So, kia ora. My Māori descent hails from the far north. So my father was born in a place called Pohora, little place in the far north. And so our story is very much one of the urban Māori diaspora. So, you know, he had to leave as a young child, the far north, went to Auckland. And then as a part of the drive towards Māori kind of entering the trades and kind of going off to different parts of the country, he ends up in the South Island in Buffs, actually. And he ends up working at the freezing works down there, which is where he met my mother. So, you know, any story about where I am now kind of have to acknowledge the fact that I'm a child of the urban migration. So the reason that I'm not speaking to you from the far north is because of that fact. And so her and my mother meeting, my mother's Pākehā, you know, that coming together of these two very different people, and that they created three children together, and then he left. And so those facts kind of set the trajectory for where I come into the picture. So I was born and bred in Christchurch, as I mentioned before. And, you know, it was an agnostic household, no religion in our household. And you know, being raised very far away from understanding what it is to be Māori. And I remember the first time that I ended up at my marae, I was 7, and I hated it. I hated being Māori. My older brother discovered where we'd come from, because we didn't know where our father had gone. So he found our father and he found our grandfather. And then as a 19-year-old, the same age my son now is, he came and he took me out with him to Te Whānau, and I hated every second of it. Because I had been raised, you know, I turned up this little pale Māori girl in patent leather shoes and a kind of like a sailor's outfit, you know. Oh my goodness. And I couldn't have been more out of place or felt more out of place. And so that is, you know, something that's stayed with me my whole life, that sense of not being in place, being always out of place. So that was a very early memory that I think I've relived a lot in the way in which I've lived my life in the last few decades. So yeah, and that's a really common story in Aotearoa today, you know, people being displaced, not feeling that the place that they're in is really the place that they belong. So raised in Christchurch, not much more to say about Christchurch really. It's a good place, especially since I left it. Two brothers and me, but my father created another family in Australia, so there's another two brothers and two sisters and a brother over there, and we love each other a lot. So I led this godless life. Well, I didn't affiliate to any particular church. I never baptised. I affiliated to the Northern Church for a while as a kid. And so I'd always felt this kind of call to God. I didn't know how to articulate it. I didn't even understand what it meant to be a Christian until the time I turned 30. And then God made his presence known. And I realised that I needed to talk to somebody about God. And so I came here to this chapter. It was where I started that faith journey. I kind of dabbled with it. So I walked in the door with a light, what posh and nice like it is now. It's Scody. Scody and dark. And people whispering in corners. It was not the most inviting place. I found the chaplain here at that time who was David Newton. He's now up in Aotearoa. And I kind of just started to talk to him about what God was, who God was, not even thinking about Jesus. Like, I didn't kind of get the whole Jesus thing. So it took, it's been 22 years now. And it was about 2016 where I started to kind of lean into the notion that actually there was a higher, well, not a higher call, but a deeper call that was leading me towards ordination. And when you're kind of responding to a call, you don't really know where it's going to lead. So you just lean into it and then keep leaning into it and then keep leaning into it, and the call becomes a bit stronger. So that's when I went into ordination. And of course, because I wasn't raised in a Māori context, going to a tikanga Māori church was never really part of the equation for me. So I found my way into Te Herenga and I stayed in Te Herenga. I'm now attending a tikanga Māori church. But it's not that uncommon of a story, actually, for Māori often have been displaced to end up in a tikanga Pākehā church. So there's a few of us in the same kind of boat, which is interesting.
I'm so interested to hear how the Lord made himself known to you at that time.
God doesn't work with me in ways that are dramatic. He insists upon himself. So on this day where I turned 30, I had a moment of nihilism, where nothing matters. If I died now, it wouldn't matter because it doesn't matter if there's a hereafter, because if I die, I'm not going to know, so it doesn't matter. And I kept telling myself this when I was 30. And then the next morning I woke up and thought, I really can't. There's got to be something more. So it was more that sense in a great big chasm, and that there was something that I was missing in my life. It wasn't like a road to Damascus experience. It wasn't like that.
No, for a lot of people, I don't think it is. And I think that they're just as real.
Yeah.
Do you have any kind of key experiences or reflections from your time as a leader in the Anglican Church?
I think one thing that I love about being priesthood, and it's taken me a while to learn it and to accept it, is that there is a way in which you can stand in certain spaces with authority that I wouldn't have if I wasn't ordained. I mean, I could feel authority, but there's a special something that ordination brings. And it's something to do with understanding that you are acting in accordance with the authority of Christ. And that's incredibly powerful. And I've had to use that a few times in my role as a priest, where I, as a person, feel terrified or completely inadequate or all the things that we're subject to as human beings. But standing on the authority of the ordination that I've received, I can stand and do X, whatever it is anyway. So that's been really powerful. It's kind of praying in the spaces where there could be darkness and things like that. Having that level of protection, or I keep coming back to this idea of mana. It's not that it's my mana, it's mana that I can find standing in. So that's something that I hadn't experienced before, which is different to other leadership. I've held other leadership roles, but that is different.
The three tikanga model of the Anglican Church, it was actually brought up in my Māori society and culture course, and they kind of used it as like a reference of like, this was a really good model for acknowledging like New Zealand's kind of multicultural and diverse story and current situation. So I just wonder if like you've got any kind of reflections on the three tikanga model of the Anglican Church.
Well, the person whose brainchild that was, Whatarangi Winiata, is still with us, is an extraordinary intellect, and his model was actually it was a two-house model, not a three-house model. The three-house model came about quite late in the process, from what I understand. But I remember learning about it at law school actually, and how there were some organisations like Women's Refuge and the Anglican Church and a couple of other organisations that were actually these were really genuine attempts to create some degree of power sharing, some degree of creating a new reality that wasn't present in other organisations. So doing church in tikanga Māori is a different experience to doing church in tikanga Pākehā, which is a different experience to doing church in tikanga Pacifica. So the way I've heard it said that the universe cracked into three, and God could be indigenous in each of those new universes. So I really love that. And to a degree, I think that's absolutely what has happened, but I also think there's a bit of a big cost to it. And part of that cost is the horizontal relationships between people. So people who spend their time in Te Ao Māori may not necessarily spend their time with people in Te Ao Pākehā. People in Te Ao Pākehā may not spend their time with people in Te Ao Māori. And actually, to facilitate relationships between people in the tikanga, there's a lot of obstacles in the way of that. And I don't think that's how it's supposed to be. So one of the critiques of the three tikanga model has been that we've taken it, as Jenny Te Pā said in her leaving speech from St John's in 2013, she said, we've taken it as a noun. Tikanga, it's like a box here and then a box here and then a box here. And you've got to get in and stay in the box. It's harder to get out of your box and go to the other box. When in fact, we should be thinking of tikanga as a verb, or e tika ana, being right, doing the right things in the right way for the right purpose, and worshipping God in particular ways. And so that if we understand that tikanga Māori and Te Ao Pākehā is thinking about ways of worshipping, ways of doing God, then it's less about the box and who defines what's in the box, and it's more about the way. And that, I think, is what we're missing. The way is still there, but we've kind of been in boxes for a while now. And so there's got to be a way of cracking out of the boxes and living in the ways that I think we could do it better. And there are moves afoot in certain communities to kind of quite literally break down the fences between some churches. But I think there's a long way to go there. And I'm not a historian of the church. This is just my observations. The fact that I go to a church where almost no one, except for the ones that come with me every so often on the fourth Sunday of every month, they've never been to Te Herenga Waka. They only know church as it's done in Te Herenga Waka. And I don't think that's quite what was originally imagined. But then I think it's also been necessary, because in order for the Māori church to survive, it had to be set apart for a while, because it was in danger of the history of the Anglican Church is the history of the Māori church. It was a Māori church to start out with. It was created by Māori kai karakia, obviously with input from the missionaries. And people lost sight of that in the middle of the 20th century. And the Māori church was deeply undermined and deeply scarred. And so, in a way, what happened in the 1990s kind of had to happen. But I don't think that's the model that's going to take us into the future quite the way in which it could be. There needs to be some work done. And it's relational work.
Do you have any thoughts on how some of that work can happen to find that way and break into some of those boxes?
A lot of it has to do with what the work that individual churches are prepared to do to realise that they're part of this place. So it's not incumbent on Māori to educate Te Ao Pākehā on what it means to be Te Ao Māori. It's kind of like Te Ao Pākehā has to come out of their box and actually cross the lines between those tikanga. And that's actually a really hard thing to do. So in order to do that, there's a bit of work that churches have to do themselves on that kind of bicultural journey. It's a really old phrase, bicultural journey. It's kind of not quite what we mean, but there's a lot of work that has to be done, I think. Because otherwise you're imposing or expecting Māori to do the work. And actually, Māori also have to come out of our box. That's true. But there's a lot of work that has to be done with individual church communities to just know where it is that they stand and where their church stands and the land on which their church stands and the people around them. So there's a lot of work that has to be done.
I think that is massive to even know the models exist in the way that they do. When coming from Nelson, and I went to an Anglican church, I grew up at an Anglican church, but didn't even know that there was a three-tikanga model until I moved to Wellington.
Yeah, exactly.
It just wasn't talked about. There was no real education. I'm sure people knew, but that just didn't ever come across in any capacity.
Yeah, so there's some stuff that has to be done there, like the signals that have to be sent out, like, the liturgy, for example, the way in which Anglican churches from Te Ao Pākehā do liturgy. there's ways, the way in which they can acknowledge the calendar and the people of the Māori church that are present in the calendar that we commemorate during the course of the year. So there's actually resources there that could be made use of. But first and foremost, it's a mindset, I think, that has to shift. And things are shifting. Like, I do get a lot of hope from the way in which te reo Māori and things like matariki, there's things happening now that I think 10 years ago I would not have dreamed. I would not have dreamed possible. And, so there's real hope there. But institutions don't change very easily. And churches are institutions, so they don't change very easily. But I think, there has to be a lot of aroha for those people. So, there has to be a lot of aroha people that are yet to make that change. And change is scary. And, there is a lot of, I guess, cynicism and bitterness out there from many Māori about the role of the church in society. And so you've got, on the one hand, kind of people that don't have any idea. And then for Māori in the church, something else we used to contend with is our family and our relatives and our friends saying, why are you comporting with the white man's God? So these are not easy things to solve. They're not. You can't expect a long-term solution, a short-term solution to do it. So I think we have to be. I think there's something we might be doing wrong in some of our teachings in church, and some of it comes from how we understand things like Galatians, and we understand Paul's message about the universalism of church, which on the one hand is this extraordinary gift because, it provided in the ancient world and all the way through till now, this way for people to connect across cultures and say, well, you and I might be very different from different cultures, but here's this, we are both children of God. And so there's something incredibly beautiful about that, but it doesn't take much for that to transmute into something much more sinister, which is about this kingdom culture is one where there is no room for culture and no room for language difference. And if you try and push back on that, then what you're doing is you are spitting in the face of God because, this is universal. And of course, you don't hear that kind of language, certainly not in Anglican circles, but I assume you hear it in evangelical circles. So there's this great gift we've been given, the church, and we comprise this great gift that we've been given. But sometimes the way in which we understand, we forget that every single language is a gift from God. We forget that every single culture is a gift from God. And so therefore it's absolutely inherent that following Jesus does not mean giving up your gifts from God. And that includes, whatever culture that you come from. So I think we kind of have to go back to basics and understand that those things are gifts from God and act accordingly. And then once we understand that, then it becomes easier to shift, I think, to accepting other people's cultures. And it goes back even more basic to the idea of in modern day. We see the image of God in every person, not regardless of the culture, but because of the culture. It's not that cultures are an impediment. It's just a necessary thing that we have to go through. Actually, it's a gift. And therefore, I don't think we're very good at seeing that somehow. And then for that to do in translation, how we do liturgy, or to translation, how we connect across the way with people from other churches. Yeah. There's no culture that's going to be, there is no culture by definition that is the perfect vehicle. Yeah. But every culture that provides a way. And, to be fully human. All culture is repetition. That's all it is. It's repetition of things that we do over time. It's not something that you put on like a coat. It's something that you grow into. And so, I had to learn how to be Māori. I did not start out culturally Māori. I didn't start out in that Te Ao Māori way. I had to learn by virtue of learning language, by virtue of doing things over and over and over and over again. Just like I had to learn, in some ways, I had to learn how to be Christian. And so all culture is repetition of certain things over time that then gets communicated down through generations. So some of that's going to be good, some of it's going to be bad. It's not all going to be good. But that's what, it's kind of like, you can't take us out of the soil. You can't take us out of the ground in which we are grown. It's impossible. God doesn't expect that of us.
To change tact a little bit, I'm very interested to know what made you go into the field of law. What led to becoming a lecturer at Victoria University?
Most of my career has been accidental. Because, I wanted to be an archaeologist when I was a kid. So we couldn't do archaeology at the Vic. So I knew there was one paper we did kind of a little bit of archaeological stuff in the classics, so I ended up in classics. And then to support myself through uni, I was a probation officer, part-time probation officer. And then one day, a friend of mine who's a probation officer said, you should become a judge. That's an interesting idea. And so I did first year law, and I got a really good mark on first year law. I said, maybe I should keep going. And so I just kept going. So I tended to fall into things, It was never a plan. There's never been a plan at all. And then I graduated. I managed to get a summer clerkship at Russell McVeigh, practice at Russell McVeigh for about 3 years. And then I actually had my first son when I was in practice. And I was the only female lawyer in Russell McVeigh in Wellington that had a child. Others are one of the senior partners. It just didn't feel right. I was protected, actually. I was on the legal mind team there, and they protected me. And so they were wonderful. But I didn't want to have another baby in practice. I had to go. So when I got pregnant with Harmland, I saw that there was a job opening as an assistant lecturer at Birth. So I applied for that. And it must have been just the right time or something, because when they interviewed me, and I actually thought when I was in the interview, I can't possibly take this job because the pay's too low. So I went through the interview and I can't do this. And then they offered me a permanent position instead of the assistant lecturing position. So that was just bloody lucky. And I've been there since 60. I've been there. So accidentally. I've never thought of myself as, I really want to be a legal academic, or I really want to be a lawyer, or I really want to be this, or I really want to be that. It's kind of like, I'll do this. Oh, I'll do that.
How was practice, and then the switch from practice to lecturing?
I think I left practice probably about a year too early. There's a discipline that comes with practice that I was developing and then I lost when I went to academia. So if I was able to have chosen, I would have chosen another year of practice. And then I've tried to keep my practice to it, and I tried to keep up practice, because there's something really great about practice, because you're problem solving. There's something incredibly powerful about being able to work with people to help solve their problems. And I love that. It was really, really good. And that's different to what you're doing in lecturing. But then lecturing has its own special gifts, because you're working with students. You're trying to inhabit a topic like criminal law, which is what I've taught for most of my years there, statutory interpretation. You've got to have to understand these things in order to be able to put them on. So yeah, practice is very different. But I wouldn't say that I actually was a competent lawyer by the time I left legal practice. I was still a baby lawyer.
I was going to ask, with lecturing, particularly in first year law, been some changes that have happened around a shift away from sort of British legal history and law alive and like these sorts of things towards more of a focus on like tikanga in our legal system. What have you thought of some of that shift and change? Because you've been involved in teaching that course this year.
Yeah. I taught about 4 weeks, just under 4 weeks of that course this year. I think there's a shift in understanding that's a bit slow, but it's getting there, that law does not just fall from the sky. That law is a human creation, and so it carries the cultural identity as the humans that created it. And so when I did my legal training, and when I was practicing as well, there's this understanding that law comprises what comes out of Parliament, what comes out of the courts, and the other grey areas in between. That's the legal system. And I really never had any conception when I was studied law that there was actually a different way, or another way of thinking about law, which was law suited to small communities, law suited, which is more values based and principles based, which was suited to small gatherings or small communities. That actually was the way in which law was done when the British arrived here. And that those things never entirely died out. and that some of that stuff is interfaced with the existing, or with the British legal system that then became domesticated here. And so one of the exciting things about the shifts that you're describing is that now every first year law student gets to hear that, and that has never been the case, that there is more than one way to do law. And so it asks a bigger question: what are we bound by? What binds us to certain kinds of behaviour? It's not just what comes out of Parliament. It's not just what comes out of the courts. There's other things to think about. So I think that's a really fundamental step in our legal pedagogy, is that enhanced understanding. Now, I can't say that's filtered through all the rest of the law degree. You may not get that anywhere else in your travels in your law degree. Depends on what your papers are,
Yeah, hopefully. A lot of them are compulsory, but...
Yeah. But even in the compulsory papers, I mean, one of the things that the Council for Legal Education has said is that that you guys are to be taught tikanga at all compulsory levels of the degree. That's to kick in at 2024. So you'll be most of the way through your degree by the time that comes in. But that's, not only as a standalone tikanga Māori course, but also through, so in criminal law and contract law and tort law, that you're supposed to be exposed to tikanga Māori. How we're going to do that, and there's lots of debate about how best to do that, whether it should be within each course or whether there should be separate courses that people should take. Either way, it's going to be a compulsory element of the law degree, but not just for Vic, but for every law school in the country. So that's massive. That's huge.
Yeah.
This is one of those things 10 years ago that I would never have dreamed, that I would have heard that. So that's some of those changes are extraordinary, but they're tricky, they're hard, and there'll be pushback on them. So the more that we can do now, ahead of time, to kind of socialise and domesticate those concepts, the better.
Do you see some of those concepts also translated in and sort of bleeding into the legal system at the moment? I'm thinking particularly of is it the Ellis case?
Oh, yep, better right.
Ellis, who was convicted and then sort of appealed the convictions, but died before that could be completed, and his trial went on. Was that at the Supreme Court?
No, the trial did. I mean, it wasn't a trial; it was an appeal.
Yeah.
So, but the question was, because usually what happens when people die in the middle of an appeal process is that, well, you're a natural person and a legal person, and if you die, then you're no longer a legal person. It's kind of the process ends. There were very rare exceptions to that, but it was argued. The lawyers for Peter Ellis tried to make an argument that the proceedings should carry on. They didn't make an argument initially on the basis of tikanga, but Justice Glazebrook said, what about tikanga Māori? Has tikanga Māori anything to say in this situation? What about mana? Has that anything to say in this situation? That came completely out of the blue because Peter Ellis is not Māori. So this was enormous because there have been numerous examples where tikanga Māori, or the practices of tikanga Māori, have been acknowledged or undermined or upheld or otherwise dealt with in the common law, or acknowledged or undermined or dealt with otherwise in legislation. This was the first time in the context of case law that I can recall anyway, where tikanga Māori where the question was asked, can tikanga Māori say anything in regards to this process, in regards to this person who's not Māori? It was huge, a huge question. And so everything changed. And so then the arguments about whether or not mana had anything to do was for somebody who was seeking to, for the estate of a person who passed on, to see whether or not that appeal could still be heard. We had to have a wānanga of tikanga experts. So people kind of getting in the same room going, what do we do with this? Is mana a concept that can apply to all New Zealanders and not just Māori? And the unanimous kind of consideration of the tikanga experts was yes, it can, because all New Zealanders have a concept or an understanding of the dignity of the person, for example. That's not a million miles away from some understandings of mana. There's an innate understanding of much of which is covered by the term mana, even if people don't use the word mana. And so that was argued, and we haven't ever had the reasoning behind what happened next. But the very fact that the case was allowed to continue tells you that mana-based argument won. We just don't know why or how, because we're waiting for the final judgment to come out. And when that comes out, we'll see some reasons from the Supreme Court. But It's a big deal. But it's not unprecedented that tikanga Māori would be upheld by Pākehā people, or that Pākehā would consider themselves bound by. The prime example is Rahui. If there's been a death by drowning, often the local iwi will put a Rahui on that area, or there's kauri dieback in the Herekino forest, and there's Rahui, it's been around for a long time actually, Rahui on the Herekino forest and some of the walking tracks. There's lots of examples of Rahui that people follow, regardless of whether they're Māori. Some don't, but many do.
Yeah.
So it's not unprecedented that tikanga Māori has been understood to have something to say to those who are not Māori. But to hear it kind of argued like that in court was a big deal.
Do you think that there's more ways that our legal system can or is changing to better sort of live into our bicultural story and like honour the treaty and tikanga?
I don't want to get all misty-eyed on it, because there's actually there's hard stuff, because there's always a danger that when you incorporate a tikanga concept, or that it's recognised in some form by the general legal system, it can easily get distorted, it can easily get twisted, it can easily get kind of divorced from the people from whom it came in the first place. So there is a school of thought, and a very strong school of thought, headed by really well-known people such as Annette Sykes and Ani Makangi, who's based up here at Te Herenga Waka, who would say that actually tikanga does not belong in the general legal system, or something like that, because of the risks that the Crown will simply just manipulate and use those concepts to the ends that best serve the Crown, and not ends that best serve Māori. So there's a real risk of that. But then you've got the other school of thought, which is headed by people like Justice Sir Joseph Williams in the Supreme Court, first Māori in the Supreme Court, definitely first Māori speaking Māori in the Supreme Court, and Natalie Coates, who was counsel for who came in to be counsel for Peter Allen, which is more on the lines of, look, it's here already. Tikanga concepts have been referred to in legislation for decades now. Māori language has been used in legislation. There's lots and lots of case law that has had to deal with Māori tikanga to some extent. So we have to take charge of the narrative and actually be proactive in ensuring that judges know what this all is, and that students are taught what this all is, so that they not necessarily they become tikanga experts, but they know what they don't know, and that we can't actually put the stopper back in the dike. It's already there. So these two perspectives are in tension, and I don't know. I think probably we are heading towards that hybrid vision of a third way of doing law that Justice Joseph Williams has talked about. When he talked about that years ago, he called it Lex Aotearoa, 2014, I think it was. He gave this groundbreaking speech where he talked about Kupe's law is the first law, Cook's law is the second law, and that the interaction between the two create this hybrid model called the third, what did I say? The Lex Aotearoa. But it's not clean, and it's not tidy, and it's not convenient. So I don't want to try and make out that it is. This is going to be hard graft. It's going to take years and years and years. It's a bit like the Māori language has had to be resurrected from pretty much almost dying. And that has taken a long time, and it's still not safe. But the language encodes the law. Language encodes tikanga Māori. So tikanga Māori also has to go through a process of kind of renaissance, if you like, in the public sphere. But it has to do so in such a way that it doesn't threaten the tikanga Māori that are being practiced by those communities in their own way, in their own time, in their own fashion. So tikanga Māori is going to increasingly come into the civic sphere, what I call the civic sphere. And hopefully that doesn't mean that the communities and their use of tikanga Māori needs to be affected. I forgot what the question was.
That was a good answer. Like multifaceted, complex.
And you did some work around kind of feminism research and how feminism and the law kind of interact, and how we've got some systems which just have kind of disproportionately negative outcomes for women. And just wondered if you could speak to kind of how that looks in our legal system today.
So it's not, let's give you an example. It's a really simple example. Let's take self-defense, the idea of self-defense. So if you rush at me with a knife and I kill you because I feel like you're going to, I feel like I'm an imminent threat of being harmed, killed by you, then I can claim self-defense, right? Now, the kind of base model for the idea of self-defense is really two men who attack each other. One attacks the other and the other one defends himself. Kind of like almost like a barroom fight, or, the paradigmatic model of self-defense is that. So if that person goes to harm you or somebody who you're responsible for, the law will find a justification for you in harming, even to the point of killing that person who carries out that attack on you. So that doesn't work in situations, for example, where a woman's been in a long-term relationship with a man and, let's say, suffered long-term physical abuse, but because of her particular situation, she can't face up in the same way. And so quite often what happens with women who claim self-defense in the case of murder is that they will incapacitate the man first. They'll tie him up, or the woman will tie him up, or otherwise incapacitate, and then attack him. And so that doesn't fit. That does not fit the paradigm. And one of the requirements for self-defense is there shouldn't be any planning in it. But often with women who kill, for example, there will be planning in it because of the nature of what they've experienced, the nature of what they know will happen if there's any freedom for the person who has oppressed them in previous years, then that person will harm them. And so that doesn't meet the test of what's required for self-defense. So that's just one example, but it's a really clear one of how legal tests are often designed with men in mind. Something like the reasonable person test. What the reasonable person is a legal fiction that's created to say if a person of sober and careful habits, or sober and moral habits, or whatever the old phrase was, saw this happening, what would they think was happening, and what would they think might be happening? That would be the reasonable person. Somebody who's disinterested, what used to be called the man on the number 8 bus, or the man on the Clapham omnibus, because it's an English construction. Now, the reasonable person may not have experienced the same kind of special characteristics of life that a woman does, or women have. And actually, this came up in the Ellis case. One of the counsel was making an argument, and Justice Joe Williams said something along the lines of, "Oh, you mean the reasonable person, the man on the horse and tiki-tiki?" The reasonable person is a construct, but there's a very limited kind of input into that construct, and it tends to be from a very specific kind of world and a very specific kind of person. So what we tried to do with the feminist legal project that we did, Te Reno, was we tried to take cases from New Zealand's legal history. And what we did was we imagined that the judge sitting was a feminist judge and could incorporate feminist thinking into the judgment. And whether or not same conditions, same circumstances, same availability of information, whether or not that would make a difference to the kinds of judgments that would be written. And yes, of course, it could make a difference. My job in that project was to be in charge of a collection of 6 of the judgments, which were mana wahine judgments, because we wanted to utilise the phrase mana wahine because sometimes mana wahine and what works to uphold the mana of Māori women may not actually align entirely with feminist ideals. For example, many who uphold mana wahine are quite happy, not always, but may well be quite happy not to speak on the speaker's bench to do whai kōrero. Now that, feminism comes from a universalist perspective. Mana wahine comes from a cultural base. So there are often tensions between feminism and mana wahine. So we decided that we would write judgments applying principles of mana wahine, or kind of utilising a mana wahine lens, looking for ways into the process of judging that would enable tikanga Māori to be used, and with specific concern for the mana women. So that was kind of taking that approach of having the mana wahine judgments alongside the feminist judgments, I think was something that other countries have since gone on to do their own feminist judgment projects, that they appreciated that. And yeah, I think that was an important part of our project.
Were there any big responses to that project? I mean, it's now like at a state where it's incorporated into. We did our way self-defense one.
Self-defense, yeah.
Yeah, we looked at that actually just last week.
Yeah.
Or the week before. Yeah, and that seems pretty massive. Do you know of any other like ways in which people responded to that?
Certainly in scholarship. So, some of our work's been cited in other scholarships. So sometimes our work has been cited in court judgments as well. There's a couple of cases, I think, where feminist judgments have been kind of referred to, which is kind of cool. But I think the most important thing is what you're describing, is the use of those judgments as part of pedagogy, because it's all about reframing what we understand the job is that one does. And so if we can shift people's perspective to just question what it is that, we tend to believe that law falls fully formed into our laps, and it doesn't. It is a cultural construct. It is there are gender constructs as a part of that. So if people are getting a different legal education, a somewhat different legal education as a result, job done. Awesome.
And then you end up with a whole next batch of defence lawyers arguing for inevitability over imminence.
Yep.
To try and address some elements of that legal test.
Yeah, that's right. And there are, those arguments are a bit more able to be more strongly made, I think, as a result. Yeah. But tax law, it's not like you're going to get results immediately.
Yeah. The law is life.
This is it. Law is law. That's right.
And you've done a bit of work in the welfare law area, I understand. What do you see as kind of some really big problems in the current system, and how would you fix them?
Kind of on one hand, I'm in awe of the welfare system, because it's this huge thing that actually, and we saw this during the pandemic, serves as a good instrument of delivery to deliver support to people who need it. So there's incredible, kind of like a bit like the tax system, fingers going everywhere. And we saw in places like, I think, was it Florida, or there were a couple of big cities in the States, that when they were starting to make payments to people, pandemic payments, that the system just wasn't used to it, because they didn't have this kind of nationalised system. And even within the States, the system of delivering was archaic and creaky and it's all over. It didn't happen here, because we've got this very, actually quite efficient system. And I'm in awe of it too, because I'm a product of it. If it wasn't for the welfare system, I don't know what my mother would have done when my father left. I don't know how she would have survived. And therefore, I don't know how we would have survived if we had to be cast on the kindness of relatives, none of whom could have supported us, I don't think. So, I'm in awe of a system that actually enabled support to be given to those who most need it. But the very thing that makes that system efficient, and that actually makes it work, and where there is a system that's created around it, is the bad thing. And what I mean by bad thing is that there is kind of, in order to give people support, you have to identify who are the people deserving of support. And so our system is based on the idea of deserving poor. And so in order to be deserving, you have to fall into the right category. This is not a universal system. It's a high targeted categorical system. You have to fall into a category to get the support. And so in order to be in the right category, you have to be, for example, you can't be in a relationship with somebody who can financially support you, right? Or provide some degree of financial support. You actually have to, the incentive that the system creates is to separate people. The incentive in order to get child's payments, there's kind of like a series of negative incentives that the system creates. But at the same time, without that categorical approach, this country would not be able to afford the welfare system that it has, not with the current tax structure that we have. In order to be able to afford some kind of universalism, other than superannuation, which is a universal benefit, you would need to have a very different tax structure. And I don't think that we're ready to go down that track. There have been some proposals for that kind of tax-based reform, but you can't have that kind of welfare reform without tax reform. You just can't. politically it's unsaleable. And so what we have as a result of this categorical system, and that meets up with this kind of radical egalitarianism that many New Zealanders seem to experience, where they think if somebody gets something that they're not entitled to, that is a moral judgment, a reason for moral judgment. There's something wonderful about, there's an egalitarianism that is actually quite a wonderful thing in New Zealand society, but it very quickly turns to this kind of radical, kind of cruel egalitarianism, which is, if you're getting something more than you deserve, that I'm not getting, or that I'm not entitled to, then you deserve to be shamed, and you deserve to be, this kind of thing going at work all the time. And I don't know what came first. I don't know if the chicken came first or the egg, because that radical egalitarianism that's part of the New Zealand social landscape, did it exist in the 19th century when the roots to the system were created, or did it come about as a result of the creation of this system? I suspect probably both are true. So, yeah, there are problems with the categorical nature of it, but we're too small of a tax base. No matter how much people call for universal benefits, without fundamental reform, and there have been proposals, like the Top Party had a proposal for a universal benefit, like universal child payment, I think, and I can't remember actually.
They want a universal basic income, and then also
But UBI,
UBI and tax reform.
Yep.
Like just a 33% tax rate, I think.
Yep, and that comes from Gareth Morgan.
Yeah.
He wrote that The Big Kahuna years ago, which is a proposal for fundamental tax reform. So there are some good policy suggestions out there. Well, here's a question. Actually, I don't know the entire answer to this because I haven't looked at it recently, but how much do you think we spend on our welfare system every year?
Mika would more likely know than I would. I have no idea.
$10 million.
10 billion?
More.
Yeah. Oh, heck, yeah. The last time I looked at it, which was a while ago now, it was something like 33 billion.
Oh.
I think it's in the 40 billions now. And it's the single largest item on the Crown account.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it's so big is because of superannuation, which is the only universal benefit that we have. Universalism is expensive. And, all the other benefits are down here. And, the superannuation is way up here, and that's why it's so expensive. I approve of superannuation. I think it's the reason why our old people are relatively well off compared to our young people. So this is, I approve. I don't want to take the away from old people, because actually I think that's where we should be with our young people, with our children. I don't know where our child poverty rate now is, but it's not where it could be. It's not up with the Nordic countries, for example, and it's not as bad as the States, but it's worse than Australia, our child poverty rate. So yeah, I think there are real problems. The support doesn't get to the people that need it most, and the people that need it most tend to be the children. And part of the reason is that there's political issues with selling extra support to children beneficiaries' families, because people in principle agree entirely that children, it's not their fault, that they should be supported, but it's their parents' fault. We've got a really morally judgmental approach, I think. And largely that's to do with how the Social Security legislation was designed. It was designed as a moral template as much as anything else. In order to claim superannuation in the old days when it first came out, or old age pension rather, you had to be a person of good and kind of moral habits, with those kind of moral tests. There wasn't a benefit for deserted wives. There was a benefit for widows because it was felt that widows deserved support, but single women or women whose husbands had left didn't deserve support to the same degree. In reality, what tended to happen was that people would get support by use of discretionary benefits. So by the time the DPB was introduced in 1972, it had already been several years of benefits being provided to women who'd been deserted anyway. But they just didn't call it that because you don't want to mix them up with the widows who were morally upright. But these women with children out of wedlock, or children where the father had run off. There was a moral, so I guess what I call it is a social template. Social security has been designed along a social template. So there's certain structures in society that are confirmed by the social security system. But I'm also in awe of it because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that very same system.
Do you think that universalism is something worth striving for with reform within tax and in other areas? So I've heard arguments that universalism and like something like universal basic income ends up saving a lot of money on all sorts of other costs, like, looking after people's well-being and physical, mental health costs, like all sorts of other things that the state has to pay for that they might not have to pay for if these sorts of social issues caused by people not being supported were mitigated through something like a universal basic income.
I don't know if it's kind of swings and roundabouts, right? Because I think there's big savings you can make in the administration, for example. If you have a universal basic income that's then administered through, like the tax department or whatever, you take away the categorisation. So the moment you put a box around something, it costs to maintain that box. And then we've got a modular system. So it's like, you have a base income or a base benefit, and then you've got a disability allowance, you've got other kinds of allowance, accommodation allowance, you've got all kinds of modular things that are tapped on, right? So even if you had a universal basic income, you would also have to get rid of those modular attachments in order to make it, streamline it. And so that's problematic, or potentially that's problematic. And what we know, the research seems to tell us anyway, is that cash transfers matter. Cash transfers matter. If you increase the amount of money that's in a household, then you will increase the good outcomes for that household. That seems to be where the research is pointing to. But if this is one of the bits of debate about the top suggestion was the universal basic income, because actually you might end up having less universal, but the amount is less. And it's like, well, okay, what you gain on the one hand by getting rid of the modular stuff with the categorical approach means that you lose the amount of base income that people get, but more people can get it. So do we win? Because the people that actually need the help, they might actually end up getting less. And there are going to be people that don't necessarily need the help.
Sometimes doesn't serve who it really aims to serve, eh?
So, which is the whole justification for a categorical system in the first place.
Right.
A targeted system needs categories.
Yeah.
And if you don't target it, then you risk not reaching the people that you want with enough cash. Because if cash transfers make the difference, you have to have enough cash going into a household to make that difference. So I'm not the person to ask about what the right solution is, because I just go, somebody else with a bigger brain can solve that one. But I think that's, what do you lose and what do you gain? So, yeah, I would love universal basic income that gave everybody a standard of living, but not everybody has the same amount of needs. What are you going to do about our disabled whānau? What are you going to do about people with very particular housing needs? The thing about the welfare system is it is so big because people are so varied, so different. And it's a system that has to account for all the differences. So again, I come back, I'm in awe of it. And it drives me crazy.
Yeah, I feel like as a student, I've tried to apply for things and I'm motivated and have community, and have people to help me do that kind of thing. And I find it overwhelming and time consuming. And I can't imagine being in a position where I'm struggling or my mental health is bad or anything like that, and then trying to motivate myself to apply for some kind of benefit and jump through all of the hoops. It's just outrageous.
It's 30 pages.
Yeah.
That's all I line for an application form. And, it requires a high degree of literacy just to understand.
And a computer.
And you can go and get help from advocates to do it. But, there's a lot of people out there that are not getting the benefits that they already need. So actually, probably an answer to your original question, if people were able to get what they're actually entitled to, that would be the first step. If people could get what they were actually entitled to, but there's a whole swathe of people that aren't getting it, if they could get what they were entitled to, then actually that would be a really good thing. And maybe that's in preference to a UBI at this point. I don't know, because the nature of the labour market is changing. And that's the whole reason why that's got more legs now, is the nature of the labour market is changing. working from home or, just differences in what comprises a workplace and automation and all those things that are happening all around the world. That's the reason why countries are bringing UBIs in, or some countries are piloting it at least, because there's people that are going to lose their jobs for no fault of their own that need to be supported somehow. And those numbers are going to get bigger. Climate change probably figures in that too, because industries will get disestablished as a result of climate change. Government's trying to deal with climate change. And the thing about Social Security, I'm sorry to rabbit on about this. The thing about Social Security that people often forget is it was never intended to reduce poverty. It's never been a poverty mechanism. It is a mechanism to enable people to get back into the workforce. That's what it was created for. And there's some other people over here who can't work, and so therefore we'll support them too. But it's a mechanism of serving to get people back into the workforce. So if that's no longer the truth, that there is no workforce to get back into, or that there's going to be many more cases of that where there's no workforce to get back into, or that the workforce is fundamentally changing, then the basic premise of Social Security is different. So that means the system has to change.
Yeah.
But yeah, people often think it's supposed to get rid of poverty. It was never the intention. As a side effect, it actually does. It prevents poverty, but it's not a panacea for poverty. It was never intended to be. You don't see the word poverty in the Social Security Act.
I feel like we've talked about some really, really big issues, right? Like we've covered the Māori, kind of the church's approach to our Māori and to like honouring our past, and we've talked about legal system and how that doesn't always serve Māori, and we've talked about feminism and the legal system and social welfare. And I think it can be really easy to feel overwhelmed by, the need. And would really love to hear you speak a little bit to what gives you hope. And where do you draw your hope from? And how in kind of your work and your life, where do you find hope for the future?
There's heaps of hope. I think some of it just comes down to your kind of personality. And my basic personality is an optimist, right? I have a degree of trust that God is working his purpose, his great purpose through it. And, I've said a couple of times during your conversation, 10 years ago, I would never have dreamed that X would happen. So there is there are things that are happening that are only happening because people of goodwill and people of imagination are making those things happen. And so I believe that God is at work in those good things. So there's a lot of hope to draw from that. And I'm not cynical. Like, I live with a cynic. My husband's quite cynical. But I do think that there's a lot to be said for good people who might not know all the good things, but are basically good people, and that God uses those good people for God's good purposes. And that is cause for great hope. And I guess an understanding that for every 2 steps forward, we are going to go back. It depends on what you mean by progress too. So it's not that I believe that everything's kind of teleologically heading towards this perfect point. I don't mean that, but I think there are good things going on, and that we can be complicit in the good stuff. And so that's important. If we can have agency and be complicit in the good stuff, that's important. And I get a lot of hope from kids. Kids are awesome. I don't know about you guys, but, there's a lot of bitching and moaning about youth and young people. But frankly, the people that I see every day at work, are amazing. So I've got a lot of hope because we've got amazing young people. Yeah, but that doesn't mean to say that you kind of say, well, God's in his heaven and all's right with the world, and so therefore, it's all good. It's not. There's lots and lots of injustice. There's lots and lots of bad things. There's lots and lots of pushback, and, the pushback against Whittaker's chocolate being labelled creamy miraka, and then the pushback from the racists about that, so for every good thing that happens, there's pushback against it. And so we know this to be the case, but we carry on anyway. And we just have faith that there are good people with good purpose and goodwill who God is using for his good purposes.
What a beautiful answer.
Also, we always ask, what is your most controversial opinion? Like if you're with other people from your field, what's something you think that you disagree with everyone else about?
It shouldn't be controversial, but I'm a supporter of the church blessing and upholding same-sex marriage. Like, it shouldn't be controversial, but it is. And I think the Anglican Church has not done enough. It said one thing and it does another. What does it say? It says that it will, that it's possible for us to bless same-sex marriages, but I haven't seen any. So I'm a bit ho-ha about that. But then I know how difficult it is because you have to get your investor to agree and you have to get, all your ducks in a row, and that's actually really difficult. So I don't like saying one thing and not upholding that. So I guess that's controversial. I didn't think it was controversial until I had a conversation last week and I realised, oh, shit. Anyone who thinks this is just wrong.
So I agree with you, yeah. But we've just got this hugely varied kind of selection of people who are part of the church, right? Who all have such different, and they all believe just as strongly as one another. I'm so on your buzz, but
we still have to love each other.
Yeah,
we have to love each other across the aisles.
Yeah,
and I don't want the church to schism over it. I really don't. So, yeah, just have to love each other.
Yeah, learning to sit around the table with those that we disagree with. Yeah. Another question that we love to ask is, what books are you reading at the moment? Or if you would have something that, like a book that's kind of been formational for you.
Well, I've just started last night reading to my daughter The Last Battle. So C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis, yeah.
And we've had a break of a few months in between. We've gone through all the other books, and so finally they got back in. My mother gave me that when I was 10. It was my 10th birthday present. And she was agnostic. I don't think she knew that there was a Jesus story, and she just thought it was good literature. Of course, it bloody well was. But that series has echoed in my mind for a long, long time, and I've talked about that in other forums, about how important those books are. So it's a real joy to read that to my girl. And so we're just on the first few pages where Shift the 8 is starting to manipulate poor old Puzzle the donkey. And it's a terrible, if you haven't read it, I recommend you read it from first book to last. It's a great, it actually answers a lot of theological issues. I've really struggled with some aspects of Christian theology, but C.S. Lewis kind of makes it all right.
I actually will need to get onto that. I never was read C.S. Lewis. It's not part of my upbringing. We were read German books instead. It'll be really cool, I think, to dive into some of the literature because I've had,
Well, it's easy to read. It's really easy stuff. And, it's of its time. It's written in the 50s. I rate it. I totally rate it.
Oh, he is full of wisdom, that man.
Mind you, don't listen to his advice about women or children. Oh, it's a bit like I've been listening to a lot of podcasts at the moment by N.T. Wright. But get him talking about women. He got no idea.
It's interesting.
No freaking idea about how women actually live their life.
Yeah, you have people who kind of have this amazing understanding of eternity, but then a complete detachment from lived experience. Yeah. And so, there's some C.S. Lewis stuff that I'm just like, I could just drink that up.
Yeah.
Well, we've really thoroughly enjoyed speaking to you. You're just a well of wisdom. Yeah, and it's a real privilege to have gotten to talk to you. So thank you for what you've shared.
My privilege. Thank you.
Thank you very much.